Well, the debate over Iraq continues to dominate the news coming out of Congress. President Bush wants to push forward with his troop surge, which he insists is necessary to secure Baghdad and ensure that Iraqi forces are able to take over security responsibilities sooner so U.S. troops can come home sooner rather than later. Well, the new Democratic majority insists that America's done enough. It opposes the troop surge, says it's time to start planning a U.S. withdrawal. Well, where is this all heading? Will Congress move to cut the funding for the war? Joining me now, freshman Congressman Christopher S. Murphy, Democrat representing Connecticut's 5th District. Congressman, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Our first opportunity since you've taken office, and how's it going down there?
It's a whirlwind. You know, normally Congress gets sworn in and then they sort of break for 2 or 3 weeks to allow freshman members to get their offices up and running and sort of deal with the logistical issues of starting up an office. And this year obviously is very different. I mean, we went right in with a very aggressive 100 hours agenda and obviously now have the very pressing question of the war to deal with. So it's why I went there, to get to work immediately, but it's been a dizzying first 6 weeks.
I'm sure. The House passed that non-binding resolution. But it was blocked in the Senate. Some procedural tactic was used there. You rose to speak about this on the House floor. What did you say?
I mean, I said that, you know, I thought this was, in essence, a pretty simple call on the question of whether we put 21,000 more troops in harm's way to do a job that, frankly, our own military leaders tell us that 100,000 troops can't do. That is trying to get in the middle and referee what has become a civil war between religious groups. That the military establishment has told us this can't work. Our foreign policy establishment through the Iraq Study Group has told us this can't work. And the public has weighed in very clearly on this question. And so this, to me, was a common sense measure for Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to step in. But here's what I said beyond that, Al. I said that, you know, we have to get outside of these boxes of 21,000 or 100,000. We need to start talking in a much broader sense about why we are in a world in which people feel that they need to do so much harm to the United States. We've got to have a much more comprehensive strategy about taking on al-Qaeda. That involves very tough conversations with our allies who are promoting these societies that foster extremism. That means talking about why America is so sort of culturally and politically detached from the rest of the world at times. And these are conversations we're just not having. Those are what's going to keep, you know, my future children and grandchildren safe.
Well, and of course, in the context of the war on terror, you read the New York Times and the article that they had about al-Qaeda reconstituting itself and probably stronger than ever now over there in the mountains of Afghanistan, Pakistan, on that border area?
Well, and think about what's happening in Afghanistan. I mean, this is a war that was a worthy one to fight. I mean, this was where al-Qaeda had trained their operatives who attacked the United States. We are now, in essence, on the verge of losing the war in Afghanistan. The Taliban is growing stronger by the day. And if you want to talk about what really poses a threat to this nation, it's a Taliban that once again can provide a safe haven for Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda forces. So to my mind, you know, when I talk about the need to move troops out of this civil war in Iraq, it's not to bring them all home to the United States, it's to redeploy some of them to fights that we still might be able to win.
What do you say to the White House argument that, all right, you don't like the president's troop surge plan, but you haven't offered an alternative?
Yeah, well, I think we have offered an alternative, and part of that, to my mind, is redeploying troops to fights that really matter. And I don't think that the solution here is to, you know, overnight bring everyone back to the United States. I think not only do we put troops in places like Afghanistan, but I think there's a lot of merit to a conversation about moving troops to the borders. Once we withdraw from these hot spots in Baghdad and other cities.
So just let them fight it out in Baghdad?
Well, you know, here's the problem. If I had any faith that the president or his folks in the diplomatic corps were serious about trying to negotiate a political solution to this civil war, then I'd say, listen, maybe let's try to stick it out. The problem is, whether we leave in the next 6 months or we leave in 2 years, we're going to leave behind a very messy situation. And listen, that's not an easy thing to talk about, but the fact is that there is a political solution to what's happening in Iraq. It is not a military solution that can be enforced by United States forces.
Should funding for the war effort be denied? I mean, we're going to now move into the phase where you're going to think about putting strings on the money and how it's used, so how the troops are used and that sort of thing?
You know, I'm not interested in micromanaging.
Because, I mean, isn't that the job of the commander-in-chief to decide, and his military people?
You know, ideally, the Congress shouldn't be involved in micromanaging the war, and I have no interest in, you know, putting Congress in that in that position. The problem is that he's asking us to put more money into a fight that I think right now we're probably potentially doing more damage than doing good. And so I don't have interest in sort of setting very detailed parameters around this war, but I do think we should engage in a conversation about the limit of our financial commitment there. Congress certainly has it within their power to say, we will give you another round of funding for this war, but you are going to use that money to start to redeploy the troops. Now, we don't have to set all of the details of that redeployment, but I think it is absolutely within our constitutional power to have that conversation.
Well, of course, now there's this talk about revoking the authority that the president was given in 2002 to go to war in Iraq. What's that going to accomplish?
Well, I'm not sure if it's revoking the authority or trying to basically curtail that authority to suggest that there isn't an open-ended commitment here. And that's certainly within our constitutional right to grant the power to make war, but also to amend and rescind the power to make war. I mean, listen, we're the elected members of Congress. We are not there just to be a rubber stamp for this president. And what this election was about was a rejection of the previous Congress that basically said yes to everything the president asked for, even if it was contrary to military opinion and public opinion. And I think it is absolutely our job as an equal branch of government to try to check this president's power.
Well, let's talk about the situation with the health care issue.
Sure.
And the poll, the Quinnipiac University poll that just came out and talked about how Americans do feel it's government's responsibility to provide this. Of course, it gets a little dicey when you ask them about how it should be paid for.
Right.
What is your position on universal health care, and how do we pay for it?
Here's the magic to me of universal health care. We have a system of health care in this country which accounts for about 16% of our gross domestic product. A study came out last week that says in the next 8 years it will be 20% of our gross domestic product, meaning 1 out of every 5 dollars spent in this country is going to be on health care. The next closest country, Canada, 11%. Every other industrialized country, 10 or under. So we have an incredibly expensive healthcare system that doesn't insure everyone and provides some patchy care in parts of the system. So I think what a universal healthcare system does is actually cost less. It doesn't cost more. Because here's what happens. Somebody that doesn't have any insurance, who should get preventative care for an illness, ends up waiting and waiting and showing up in an emergency room when they have to get the most expensive care. You know, a foot infection, for instance, that could have been treated with some antibiotics, ends up turning into an amputation. These stories, you know, are real. That costs the system infinitely more than that preventative care. I think if we had a system that insured everyone, it would actually cost taxpayers less money than our current system does.
You know, on the state level, they're talking about this this bill to require insurers to prove why a procedure is not medically necessary, to kind of turn it around. And I just wonder if you know, something like that might get to Congress's attention, or how you feel about that. Do you think that that should be done? I
mean, here's the problem. When you add, you know, sort of new requirements to the system like that, you end up in some parts just driving up the expense of the system as a whole. I mean, we spend, you know, 15 to 20% of our healthcare dollars just on paperwork and administration. And so, you know, I'm one of these folks who thinks that these, you know, sort of incremental patchwork fixes to our current system might just end up adding more cost to the system. I'd rather have us really enter into a much more fundamental conversation about major reform to the system, rather than trying to make insurance companies do, you know, a better job of administering what is a very broken and fractured system.
What do you think about this debate over requiring young girls to be vaccinated with the cervical cancer vaccine?
Well, you know, listen, this is a real breakthrough that could save lives. And if we want to get serious about cancer treatment and prevention, then I think this is a worthy conversation to have. We have to deal with the fact that there are things happening in this world that are going to expose young girls and women in their 20s and 30s to cervical cancer. And if this vaccination can prevent
but I mean, should it be
disease.
Required or just recommended? I mean, that's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think it is, and I don't know where to come down on that. It's such a new vaccination at this point that, you know, I think at some level, you know, every family has to confront that differently. But if we can put some resources up front right now, initially into education, then that's probably the best means of getting the vaccine out there.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here and have a couple more minutes and a couple more questions for Congressman Chris Murphy. You're watching Face the State on Channel 3. More questions for Connecticut Congressman Chris Murphy, Democrat representing the 5th District in Connecticut. Congressman Murphy, what's going on with the minimum wage situation?
Well, I think we're...
Because, I mean, that was like job one, as you stated in your campaign.
No, that's right. You know, we haven't raised the federal minimum wage for 10 years. During the same period, Congress raised their own salary by $40,000, which shows you the sort of backwards priorities down there. But I think we're on the verge of a pretty good compromise, which is a bill that's going to raise the federal minimum wage so that it's very close to Connecticut's standard, packaged together with some important small business tax breaks. You know, we've had some pretty strange tax policy in this country that really hasn't targeted it, tax breaks to where they really need to go. So we passed a small business tax break bill, tax cut bill last week in the House, which I think is going to get us, hopefully in the next few weeks, to a minimum wage increase for the hardworking families across this country.
And this would be spread out over a couple of years, this minimum wage increase?
It would get it up to $7.25 over a few years. Connecticut is poised to go up to $7.65, and that's important for Connecticut because it means that we won't be at a disadvantage with other states that previous to this had a minimum wage around the $5 mark.
So you give tax breaks to business. On one hand, you're giving them a break on their taxes. On the other hand, they're going to have to pay more as a minimum, as a floor wage anyway.
You know, and again, this really doesn't affect Connecticut companies, but you know, the living wage, you know, the sort of poverty rate basically requires that you pay even more than that $7.65 or $7.25 rate. But the tax cuts and tax breaks we're talking about are ones that are really going to simplify the tax code for family-owned businesses. The work opportunity tax credit for hiring some disadvantaged workers is going to be increased. So it's the right kind of tax relief for businesses. I
know you've had a series of town hall meetings on Iraq, and now you have one coming up next Saturday, the 3rd, on education. Where's that going to be? We're
going to have a town hall meeting in Danbury on education. We're going to talk primarily, I think, about the No Child Left Behind Act. That's up for reauthorization this year. We want to hear from families, from teachers, from students about how we can do a better job of reauthorizing No Child Left Behind. We'll talk about higher education as well. We need to really focus like a laser beam on making college affordable for families again. And these town hall meetings are just a great way for me to listen about the issues that we really should be focusing in on.
Where is this town hall meeting going to be?
It's going to be the City Hall, the council chambers in Danbury.
All right, and what time next Saturday?
I think it's going to be Saturday afternoon. I think you can check our website for the exact time and date.
So come one, come all. Your website is?
It's chrismurphy.house.gov.
Okay. Thank you so much, Congressman, for coming in.